Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer! Zola! And a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it! And here's Limpar, lines it up, finds the net. Arsenal are in front.
If it's true that winning ugly is the sign of a good team, then Arsenal are surely the best team in all of England. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith, and you can block me on Twitter at Yankee Gunner. We've got a great podcast lined up. We're going to do things a little bit differently. We'll do the whole chat, the entire discussion up front before the stat section. Scott will come in at the end with his stat section so we don't break up what I think will be a spectacular discussion of what was maybe not a spectacular performance. And here to discuss it is Paul. You can find him on Twitter at Pausing in My Pants. Hello, Paz. Yep, great. Off to a flyer there. Thanks, Paz. Good to talk to you as always. Tim's here. You can find him on Twitter at Stilberto. Hello, Tim.
Dramatic pause for effect. Hello there.
Usually it's Clive that forgets to undo the mute button, but Paul, I guess, is starstruck because also joining us from his perch high atop the mountain of Arsenal content is Andrew. You can find him on Twitter at Arseblog, in fact. Hello, Andrew.
Hey, Elliot. How are you?
Good to chat with you. And we are going to have to come up with something to discuss because the performance at the Emirates on Sunday was maybe not the finest. And Andrew, I'll just start with you with sort of a philosophical question. I think I have been told in nice and not so nice terms that I am a, how shall I put this, moaning cunt on Twitter. But okay. I'm always torn. You don't have to agree with that, by the way. But I'm always torn when it comes to breaking down a performance that results in 3 points, but maybe isn't a vintage Arsenal performance, because there are always people that are going to say, hey, a win is a win. You know, why can't you be happy? You should be upbeat about these things. Philosophically, sort of what's your attitude towards discussing a game where we did get 3 points and did keep a clean sheet and did score 2 goals, but have to concede that it wasn't necessarily a vintage performance?
I think the thing that crosses my mind is that we're fans and we're supporters, and, you know, we're quite privileged in a way to do what we do in terms of podcasts and have an audience and people to talk to, and people for some reason like to listen to what it is that we say.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, well, look, my overriding feeling is that there are people out there who feel that analysis or criticism or discussion of things which don't go wrong is somehow anathema to being a fan or a supporter, which I just don't agree with. You can play terribly and win a game, but we're not cheerleaders, right? We're not there just to cheerlead and say, yay, we've won, that's it. You know, life would be very boring if that was as far as we took any discussion. So
and
I think,
look terrible in a skirt, by the way. So.
Well, yeah, well, look, I can imagine, but I think
don't.
we have to be able to say this was good, that was bad, without being immediately cast into the fires of how shall I put this? You know, you're somehow a negative force which is, you know, sucking the life out of Arsenal simply because you're discussing those things. So for me, it's really easy. I can see both sides of it. Yes, we won. I'm delighted we won. But if things aren't right, let's talk about the things that aren't right, because those actually are probably the most interesting things about being a fan. You know, if you play brilliantly, it's great. And you can say, this was fantastic, this was fantastic. But maybe it doesn't take an awful lot to work out why that happened. Whereas if you're trying to figure out what a system is, what the process is, why aren't we clicking necessarily in the final third? What's wrong with our defense that isn't a 5'10" bearded German? You know, those things, you know, they're worthy of discussion, and we can do that without being. We're not just being critical for the sake of being critical. We're just talking about them because they're things that we should talk about.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And ultimately, I mean, I do think that, you know, look, we got the 3 points. Discussing the things that went wrong in the game aren't going to take the 3 points away from us. So, you know, I don't think it can hurt. I also think, Tim, that there is a fair debate to be had about process versus outcome. You know, I mean, you look at United last season, I can't help but think of them, and the underlying numbers were terrible. They were a team that did not perform well, and De Gea really saved them and got them into the top 4 almost on his own brilliance. And you had a lot of United fans that I saw, you know, giving it large about, hey, we're in the top 4, we're in the Champions League, you know, go tell us we were poor from your perch on Thursdays and all that. But at the end of the day, we're seeing now that poor process is resulting in bad outcomes, and it's what you might call regression, right? They're regressing to the mean, so to speak. So, I mean, to what extent for you is the process a worry here? I guess if I had to ask you what the system we were trying to play was. Explain for me, as certainly in the first half, what was the system? What was the approach? Because other than sort of a lot of horizontal passing, which we've seen, I couldn't really make out what we were trying to do.
No, neither could I, and that's obviously been a real theme of the season so far. I am still worried about the process, delighted with the results recently, of course, but I still have a lot of concerns about the process, and I know we said before this game that Everton would be quite a good gauge for where we actually are, because they're not brilliant or terrible like all the other teams we've played so far. But I don't know, I was still, performance-wise, I was still not really sated by this at all, and I still tend to think if we play anyone good, that this won't do, basically, because what we're doing at the moment is, I don't know whether this is by accident or design, but it's goals that are changing games for us at the moment. It's not something, well, obviously scoring a goal is something that we do, but do you know what I mean? It's not like
it's not a tactical shift or an approach that we're taking that's giving us the impetus in the game. Exactly. And even Torreira, he's come on at half-time a few times and he's definitely made a difference. But what's made a difference has been a goal. And usually it's been a moment of it's been an individual feat. So, Granit Xhaka spanking a free kick into the top corner from 30 yards and, Lacazette spanking one into the top corner from slightly closer in, but no less impressive a goal when he's just about to come off as well. It still kind of feels like, but then we all know goals change games, etc., but I don't understand what it is about the goals that then makes things seem to click for at least 15 or 20 minutes, whether that's broadly just a confidence thing or whether I tend to think what it probably is the individuals we have going forward are so talented that even though we're probably only getting 70 to 80% out of each of them, that's kind of enough against most teams, because they're all really good. Well, let me ask you this, actually. Would it be charitable to suggest that playing a little more conservatively early in the hopes that our supremely talented players will get us an opening goal, what's changing the game is we've been playing weaker teams, and weaker teams are going to sit in and look to counter. But once you get that 1-0 lead, the pressure's on them to take the game to you a little more, which probably suits us. So maybe, is it possible, and this may be the most charitable interpretation, but that Emery is saying, okay, we're not great defensively. We're going to play a little more conservatively early because falling behind is absolutely the worst case scenario for us. Then we have to push up more. We have to attack more. We're more vulnerable to the counter. So we'll keep it tight. We'll try to get an opening goal. And when we do that, that will shift the pattern of play in our favor. I mean, is that overly charitable, or is that maybe where his head's at right now?
I think that's where his head's at, yes. He's used the phrase, even before his first game, he used the phrase about staying in the game for 90 minutes. And I kind of, initially, I took that purely physically. I took that as a kind of, I'm going to work them hard so that they can run for 90 minutes and work hard. But actually, it kind of, I don't know whether this is just a kind of confirmation bias because of the way the games have gone, but it kind of feels like it's shaking out that his plan is to stay in the game. And I think that's maybe somewhere where you can say we've improved a bit in terms of even when we are in a bit of a lull, we stay in the game. And I suppose a charitable interpretation would be that we control the big moments, that we've been fairly clinical, we take the chances when they come. I don't know if there's a little bit of... See, I'm tempted to say another thing that Emery has identifiably changed is that he's quite set on having that double pivot. So it's not just Granit Xhaka with, the free-form space jazz midfield in front of him. He does have like an identifiable partner with some defensive acumen, be that Guendouzi or Torreira. So there's a part of me that kind of thinks, well, maybe that, giveth and taketh away in terms of our attacking acumen versus... being a bit more solid. But then I kind of look at us and think, but are we more solid? It doesn't really feel like we are. And Petr Cech is making a lot of saves. It wasn't just that this was his finest performance of the season. I'm so sure we'll talk about him later. But yes. I think generally he's played very well in all of our games this season. It's just, a couple of mistakes with the feet, but I think he's been pretty exemplary, actually, those aberrations aside. So I don't know. There seems to be a lot going on and nothing going on all at the same time. And it's kind of frustrating. It's a really weird position for us to be in, just to wrap up, in terms of you really want to say, well, this doesn't look great yet. But then you have to stop yourself because it's so early in the Emery project, and then you also want to say this doesn't look great, but then you stop yourself because we're winning. So like you've got this kind of almost like heat on the back of your neck that makes you want to criticize the process, but then there's just a couple of little voices in your head that stop you, and it's like it's like we're kind of suspended at the moment, kind of looking on and having to bite our tongues a bit.
That voice in my head must be stuck in traffic because it hasn't arrived yet. So don't worry about me, I'm fine. I think to your point though, I absolutely believe we're early in the Emery process. I think what would help me more is if I saw a little bit clearer what the process was, right? So like in those first 2 games, it was clear what we were trying to do. We just were playing teams that, well, in the case of City was better than us, and we weren't able to execute as well as they were. In the case of Chelsea, we only did it for a half for some reason, which we debated hotly after that. But in these games against the weaker teams, that's been less clear to me, and I think that's the problem. If I could see like, oh, it's clear we're a pressing team now, and that's what we do, and it's still taking time to come together, okay, but that doesn't seem to be what we do. So I'm trying to figure that out, and I'm sure Emery is to some extent too, and we've got plenty of games still to see. So I guess patience is a virtue that I will have to learn to adopt. Paul, if you weren't kidding about just being an audience member on this podcast, we'll give you oh yeah, there he is. We'll give him a quick word here. I assure you it'll just be quick, listener. But I'll give you a chance to sort of beat your chest here. You did say after the Newcastle match that one of the things that you noticed was that after Torreira came in at halftime, for the 15 minutes that followed, Xhaka was incredibly busy as a passer, and that it really unleashed him to be the distributor, to be the one who broke the lines and built the play. And he dominated the passing stats in this game, starting with Torreira alongside him. So it was the biggest observation you can make from Torreira's start that it gave Xhaka that responsibility to really be the distributor and the fulcrum for our midfield?
Yeah, I think so. And the period of the game in which we looked hottest was the 15 minutes leading into the 2 goals. And again, we scored 2 goals in 3 minutes. And if you go back and look at that section, I mean, you can always get into correlation and causation, but once again, he's heading towards 23% or something of all our passes in the period leading up to that. Even though he's not synonymous with the 2 goals, he is the guy who sets the rhythm in terms of passing. It's kind of like goals coming once he hits it's like a takeoff velocity. Once he gets over the 20, 21, 22% in passing, it seems like there's a goal incoming. And again, maybe that's a correlation causation thing, but certainly he was hot during that period. I think the other adjustment that needs to be made, it's great we've got Torreira started with Xhaka beside him. The other thing that needs to happen is somebody needs to tell Xhaka not to pick up the ball from the centre backs because we've got Torreira there. It feels like the strategy is to use Xhaka as a goat staked out in the clearing for their attack, their press and their attack to come after us.
Yeah, they targeted him big time. Well, let me ask you about that just super quick. I mean, I pointed out that he was, very vulnerable to the press, and some people are like, oh, well, look at the pressure he's getting the ball under. And we touched on this on the halftime show. But, if you watch teams that play out from the back, like Sarri's Chelsea, for example, they expect to be under pressure, under intense pressure, and they have to be able to cleanly distribute or wriggle out of that pressure so that you can break the press. The whole idea of playing out from the back is to suck that pressure in and then play around it. So as far as being played in under pressure, I know there was that one example where Czech gave it to him and he kind of dawdled on the ball and gave it away, and Everton almost got a goal from that. I mean, is Xhaka's vulnerability to the press a big problem for us trying to play out that way?
Yeah, and I think we both saw kind of quite a bit of counter argument on the Twitters about how we shouldn't have given Xhaka the ball in this position or in that position, but that's actually exactly the spider's web you're looking to set in a good team able to handle the press. You want to suck them, you want them to come after you so you can ping it and go past them. And Torreira seems to be the guy who can move it at that kind of speed, like Santi used to be able to. Xhaka, quite the opposite. He seems to be the signal for their press, which is not really how it's supposed to work. So half of it right, we are luring them in.
And you went again. So clearly you have a loose mic cable, and now we have settled on the problem. It also gives me a chance to shift the discussion back to Andrew. So I will allow you to correct that as we do. So, Andrew, one of the things that, I think all of us were excited to see this season was the attacking talent that we had all on the pitch together. Ramsey, Ozil, Lacazette, Aubameyang. And I think there were a lot of people, myself included, who opined that anything we achieved this season would be built around what we could get from all of that attacking talent. And yet, it now appears that the problem with all that attacking talent is we can't seem to get it on the pitch in a way that maximizes their capabilities. And certainly Ramsey and Ozil seem the poorer for it. For you, are you as disappointed, maybe disappointed isn't the word you want to choose, but struggling to see the benefits of using Ozil and Ramsey this way? And what do you think is the right way to try to get them more involved in the game?
Well, that is the $64,000 question. I think it's been strange, hasn't it? Because you look at Aubameyang on the left and you feel like that's not where you get the best out of him. But he scored again yesterday. He scored a lot of goals from the left-hand side since he arrived. He played out there when Arsene Wenger was manager in his last few games. Lacazette, he's shown his value as a centre forward. I think that's an absolutely outstanding goal that he scored, a piece of individual quality that set us apart from Everton. It didn't feel like a game where teamwork was going to open up Everton and provide the chances, which is, it's kind of strange. I think you touched on the first two games, and in particular that 15, 20 minutes against Chelsea, where we had such success moving the ball via our fullbacks and making cutbacks, which provided really good chances in front of the Chelsea goal. You felt that was kind of the blueprint of what we were trying to do from an attacking point of view this season. And we haven't really seen that a great deal since. So I'm struggling to find the balance in the way that the team is set up from an attacking point of view. I think we've got, as Tim said, we've got the midfield in terms of personnel. We'll probably see Torreira and Xhaka for quite a while. We'll see them get a run of games. But it's that front four, I think, which feels imbalanced to me, and I'm not sure quite how you fix it. Ramsey was quite poor yesterday, but he still created 3 chances for us.
And got 2 assists. One pretty dubious assist.
No, I take issue with that. I think that was an absolutely fantastic piece of play.
Sure, it's just miles offside, is all I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
The play is
sorry.
great.
Yeah. The improvisation to put the ball behind him to Aubameyang was absolutely superb.
Yeah, I said so on Twitter. It's just obviously, and I love an offside goal. Of course.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, in another day, it's not allowed.
Of course. No, I get that. But overall, I didn't think he was that great, but he created a chance for Lacazette in the first half, which is probably our most dangerous position to get in the first half. And Lacazette took a touch and he got robbed. So it's a difficult thing because he's got all these things to try and figure out. Like Aubameyang maybe isn't that comfortable on the left, but when he's playing the two of them together, they both scored. So that's a positive. So, okay, we go with that. The one I think that is really interesting is Ozil, and it feels to me like there's just something more going on with Mesut Ozil than we know or that we understand, or that goes beyond where he's being asked to play and the role that he's being asked to play, because he has played on that right-hand side before, not for any great length of time, but he has played there before, and he's always been much more involved in the games than he was yesterday and than he has been this season. And I'm not one to sort of read a huge amount into body language, and Ozil's body language in particular. You could write a book on it. People will probably write theses on this guy in the future about the way that he approaches the game. But there was one moment yesterday, I can't remember what it was, where he sort of was trying to win the ball back over near the touchline, and it all just looked completely half-hearted, like he was going through the motions. And maybe it was just that particular piece of play, I don't know, but it just feels to me like there's something going on with him that isn't quite right, and I think that's being reflected in his performances. And I think Emery's in a difficult position where he might need to think about doing something different, but by doing something different, he might exacerbate whatever this issue is with Mesut Ozil and his confidence. So it's a tricky situation for him. I think what has been beneficial is the fact that we've had a relatively friendly run of fixtures. Ozil has scored twice in those. But I think he's going to have to come to a decision about Ramsey and Ozil sooner rather than later. As soon as we face higher quality opposition, I think that's going to be an either-or situation.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic. I mean, this goes back to the same thing we were talking about with the result, which is Ozil's really struggling, but he's scored recently, and Ramsey's really struggling. He had 2 assists on the day, and Aubameyang doesn't look comfortable on the left wing. He's got 3 goals in the last 2 games, or 4 and 4, and I mean, it's hard because on the one hand, you don't want to avoid discussing the process, but on the other hand, when the outcome is working for you, you can overthink these things. So you have to find a balance for it. What I will say about Ozil is, even putting aside the debate about body language, Andrew, like there were several situations yesterday, put aside whether he likes playing on the right or he doesn't or this or that, there were situations where you would expect Mesut Ozil to thrive. There were a couple counterattack situations that he didn't execute well. There was the one where Aubameyang does score, where Ozil kind of almost screwed that up for us. There was one where
I think he should have had a shot there. I think he should have
done something else.
Shot. Yeah.
There was another one where he's driving straight through the middle of the pitch. It was a counterattack, and he tried to split the center backs to have whoever was on the left run onto it, but the pass was badly weighted. It was easily cut out. I mean, those aren't body language issues or positioning issues. He's just not executing. His touch doesn't look right. I mean, you don't want to speculate about with what happened in Germany and things like that, but I definitely think something is wrong. I mean, as far as him versus Ramsey, if one of them had to sit out, would you move Ozil to the 10 and sit Ramsey out, or would you leave Ramsey where he is and let Ozil rest for a bit? If it came down to that, I know there are other options, but
it might depend on who we're playing. I think you could take it on a game-by-game basis. I think there might be opposition where Ozil is much more suited to that role, and Ramsey might be more suited to a role. If we were going away from home to Manchester United or to Tottenham or to Manchester City, you might say that Ramsey is better suited to that because he's got a better engine. He's probably a bit more harder running. Could offer you some more discipline in that area if you can get that out of Aaron Ramsey. And Mesut Ozil away from home hasn't always been that effective. So I would take it on a game-by-game basis, but I do wonder as well if the fact that Ramsey's contract situation means that we probably ought to put our eggs in the basket of the guy who at least has committed to the club, rather than building something around a guy who at this point looks like he's going to leave.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. You got a guy on 300,000+ a week, and he's here for a while, so you have to make him work. I mean, if Ramsey's leaving, you certainly don't want to upset the players that are here long term to try to squeeze him in. So, Tim, there's a couple of things here, and the first one, for me, is just the question of this striker situation. And obviously, this is where you have to be careful, right? Because there are a lot of hills I've been willing to die on over the years. Giroud. And here I am back at the striker hill, wanting to die on it yet again for some reason. I'm an Aubameyang guy. I can't help that. I mean, we have taken this 0.9 XG per 90 striker and turned him into a 0.2 XG per 90 winger, and I don't know that he looks super comfortable out there. Late in the game, before he was substituted, he's standing on the left touchline delivering crosses. I don't think anybody's idea of what his contribution should be is that. He did score a goal from dead center of the box on a counterattack, which is exactly what you want to see. I can't help feel that we're not getting the most out of him. I also don't think this was vintage Lacazette before he powers one in off the right post. So, I mean, another game under our belts of seeing Lacazette central and Aubameyang on the wing. How are your thoughts on that evolving?
Yeah, it's another one that's only about 75% convincing. I think you're right. I think, and again, I know you've made this point a few times. Lacazette's the one who's...
What?
Well, it's a good point. Lacazette is the only one in that attack who you'd say, yeah, he's performing somewhere near his best, and it's because he's the only one playing in the position he actually wants to play in. And Aubameyang, is substituted quite early again, and I wonder what's going through his head. And in one respect, that shouldn't really be the primary concern. The concern should be the unit and everything, but the unit's not quite there. I'm still not convinced by it. I'm going to bang this drum again. I still think we should play them as a front two. We should go to a back three. I just think that shape suits the players we have the best, and I've said many times why I think that. But I guess if you're Emery, then maybe if he's really not a fan of that system and he's thinking, well, give me a couple of transfer windows and our squad won't look like that at all, then I can understand why he's not exactly kind of betting on this being his long-term team. I'm still not 100% convinced by it. I think what it does do if we've got Lacazette and Aubameyang, just to go back to your previous question about whether you play Ramsey or Ozil, if you've got Lacazette and Aubameyang in the team, I think you play Ozil and you sit Ramsey out, because Ramsey is the kind of midfielder who's really, really valuable when you've got one striker. When you've got Giroud up front as the kind of single point of contact, shall we say, Ramsey's, and we see this with like Lampard playing off of Drogba, Ali playing off of Kane. That kind of midfielder really works. When you've got two strikers, I don't think you need that as much, and what you need is a creator. And so if we're talking about a front four, I think Mkhitaryan, Ozil as the kind of creative presence, and Aubameyang and Lacazette as the finishing presence. I think that's a bit of a nicer balance. And I wonder if we'd get a little bit more from Aubameyang, even as a left-sided forward, if we set up like that, where we have two creative players whose job is to try and feed both of them. At the moment, we've kind of got Ramsey veering over to the left as well, which I think is on instruction. Don't get me wrong, and I understand like the concept of wanting to get your best players close to each other, but it just kind of feels like Ramsey and Aubameyang are kind of occupying the same spaces. And I know, again, Ramsey, lovely bit of improvised skill to set Aubameyang up. But the fact is, in that moment, they're standing on exactly the same spot. And it comes together really kind of by accident. I mean, I think it's a poor decision by Ozil to pass. I think the shot is much easier. I think he's in a better position than Ramsey. And then it's a really shit pass. Like, that's a simple pass, and he really cocks it up. Unfortunately, Ramsey's...
That's still Birdo on Twitter. Just if Ozology is listening, which I'm sure he is.
And, I'm changing my address. But, so... As much as I don't want to take anything away from the assist and the goal, the point is they're standing in exactly the same place, like a yard away from each other, and we just about make it work. But I don't think it really does work. Or if we're going to have Ramsey and Ozil, I'd be more inclined to put Ramsey on the right coming in and Ozil in the centre. I tend to think Ozil is one of those players you either play at number 10 or you don't bother, broadly speaking. And I just feel like maybe we wouldn't get 100% of Aubameyang still, but if we had a slightly more creative bent to the front four, if we tilted that balance a little bit, that we might get enough out of him to make it less of an issue.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, can I ask you this just real quick, Tim, just super quickly? I mean, we started the season with Aubameyang up front, Iwobi, Mkhitaryan on either side, against Chelsea, for example. Aubameyang up front, Iwobi, Mkhitaryan on either side. And I realize you can't bench Ozil and Ramsey every game, although it's a fair question to ask why not if that's what's best for the team. But what I think is interesting is, and maybe it was due to the nature of the opposition, but at the start of the season, this manager felt that setup was the way to go. And the results didn't go our way, but there were really good signs, and he hasn't really done it since. And I'm sort of curious just to get your quick thoughts on why we haven't at least seen him in periods of a game or for any of these games go back to what he was trying at the start of the season, which obviously, I know we didn't get the results, but I think a lot of people were prepared for us not to get the results in those games.
I think the simple answer is that Lacazette fought his way in. And I think with some justification, he sat out the first few games, but he really showed something and made himself, I wouldn't say indispensable at this stage, but it's very difficult to make a case for taking Lacazette out, and not just because he himself is playing well. I do think he's getting something out of other players as well. I think the question for me is more about Mkhitaryan coming out. When I think he's quite essential. If you're going to play that way, if you're going to play that 4-2-3-1, I think Mkhitaryan is a key to it. So I think that's where I'd be more inclined to ask the question.
Yeah, fair enough. Paul, I do think we should at least at this point give some credit to Petr Cech, because our ability to win this game and even stay in this game is down to him doing really well. And he was 14 of 15 on his short passes. He made all the saves. I mean, on XG, this game was basically even, about 1-1, and we win it 2-0. There's been a lot of debate about whether it should be Leno or Cech. I just think that Petr Cech deserves credit for doing the part of the goalkeeping job that's most important, saving shots. He's been brilliant at it. And, the short passing is coming together at least a little bit. The irony is when we go long, for anybody who's out there listening who moans when we go short and just wants us to kick it long, He's 9 of 18 on long passes again today. I think we're, for the season, under 50% completing long kicks from check, which means the ball's coming right back at us and we're not retaining possession when he does go long. So obviously there are benefits to playing short, keeping possession among them. But do you want to just quickly sort of give your thoughts on Czech's performance and the start to the season that he's had?
Yeah, I mean, he's been a mensch about this. I mean, he's really, was it Lacazette who said it takes balls to do what he's doing? And it does. I mean, he's had to fight his way back into respect, into the number one spot, even if it was never quite vacated. He's kind of made it his own right now and put that to bed. And I mean, it's a hell of an adaptation from him. While he's, what he's really getting hammered for is his inability to play out from the back, but that's as much to do with his compadres around him. One hopes that maybe we'll get an uptick here with Torreira in place, because he seems like the one guy who's super designed to pick up the ball, turn quickly, and absorb some pressure, and maybe can start making everybody else look good. So, I mean, it's you can't do anything but have immense respect for the guy. I also think it's interesting that with the spotlight on him and with the applause and aplomb he's getting, he couldn't help but kind of blurt out the thing about Arsenal and how we needed to change our mentality and get back to a winning mentality, which we haven't had for, I think he mentioned, the 14 years since we won a league. So that was it was a very interesting talking point he threw up there.
Yeah, well, and he's right. I mean, certainly, we sometimes dismissed soft factors like mentality, but there's clearly something to that. I think we've seen that over the years, and maybe that's the other thing about getting results is that bad process leading to good outcome still has one huge benefit. If it lifts confidence, if it lifts mentality, and the players start to believe in themselves more, that can ultimately help you get the process going in the right direction as well if players are playing with more confidence. And it is easy to just hand wave those kinds of factors, but they do play a role in the game. I think one thing that scared the crap out of me, Andrew, and Mustafi in general scares the crap out of me, but Mustafi without Socrates next to him was pretty terrifying. And when Socrates went off, I had one of my typically measured Twitter comments about it. But Holding came in and did a really nice job, not just defensively, but on the ball as well. I mean, how worried were you when Socrates went off, or Socrates went off, or if Socrates went off, or if you have a favorite Socrates insight that you want to share, that'd be fine too. But how worried were you when he went off, and how impressed were you with Holding coming in?
I was worried because Mustafi had picked up an injury just before that, and he looked to be in some discomfort.
Wasn't that to his testicles, though?
No, that was later in the game where he got to his testicles, and I think we can all enjoy a football to the groin, that old Simpsons classic, of course. But I was a little bit worried because when he picked up that injury, they showed a replay on the TV, and it didn't look like he got kicked or anything like that. So it was one of those where seemed to be little contact. So I was worried that when Socrates went off, if Mustafi also had to go off, then we were in big trouble in terms of the center of our defense. And it's interesting to hear Tim talk about three at the back. I mean, we only have three center halves at this moment in time, so it's like, well,
then it's perfect. 3 and 3, it fits.
Who needs any depth? I mean, you look back at last season, we had probably 6 or 7 potential candidates to play in that position. I know we could include Monreal in there now as a guy who could do a job if we really, really needed him to. But yeah, I thought Holding did well. I thought he did well against FC Vorskla on the Thursday night. He was very, very tidy on the ball. In particular, he's been sort of quietly just getting on with his job. And I personally, I would not be opposed if and when Socrates comes back to seeing a bit of Socrates and Holding together in the center of our defense. I think Emery is probably deferring a little bit to experience in terms of his central defensive partnership. It's safe, on paper anyway. It's safe when you leave out the the inevitable mistake or brain fart that Mustafi will have during a game. And if there's one thing that's consistent about our season so far, it's been his ability to pull that off in every single game. And even the incident in which Socrates got injured came when Mustafi got caught on the ball, and there's a great clip I posted on Twitter earlier. Socrates is coming back and it's basically like, what the fuck, man? Just get rid of the fucking ball, so I'd be curious to see how Socrates and Holding got on together, but I can see why really he's choosing the two senior men. I suppose what we have to hope is that Emery is the kind of coach that as and when a player comes in and shows him he's doing the right things and can add something to the team, then he will consider him for a place in the team. Tim spoke about Lacazette forcing his way into the side, and maybe, with the Carabao Cup game coming up on Wednesday, and then the league game on Saturday, maybe Socrates will be fit, maybe he won't. We don't have an update just yet, but maybe Holding might get a little run in the side, which might stand him in good stead and give Emery something to think about. But it is, in general, it's an area that worries the shit out of me because I feel like we don't really have the requisite depth and experience in there. I know a lot of people have got high hopes for Mavropanos, and I do too. But
we haven't seen him at all. It's pure speculation at this point.
Yeah, we've really got no way of knowing how ready he is. And my suspicion, we were talking about this earlier today, myself and Andrew Allen, who does Arseblog News, was like, is there some reason why Mavropanos is not being included in those medical updates on the official site? So they have a medical update for everybody. They've got Carl Jenkinson, they've got Koscielny, they do it every week, and Lauren Koscielny, long-term injury, blah, blah, blah. There's no mention of Mavropanos, despite the fact that he's supposedly got a groin injury. So the logical conclusion I come to is that he doesn't have an injury and he's just not being included in the squads. So maybe I'm wrong, but it just makes me wonder a little bit about how ready he is to step in. So hopefully we don't have any big issue with Socrates and that injury, because otherwise I think we're in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, it could be Nacho Monreal at center back that we could be looking at, except we don't have another left back. So there are no easy choices. For you, just staying with you just for a second, I have been of the opinion that this whole lineup, the whole way we're trying to do this, feels a little bit like what Wenger might have done, which is, these are my best players and I'm going to put them all on the pitch and let them figure it out to some extent. And I'm not saying that there isn't more instruction than that. And I'm not saying that Arsene Wenger never did those things. I'm just trying to avoid abuse by caveating it. But my question is basically, do you feel, if this is going to sound terrible, but if you didn't know we'd changed managers and you watched this game and you saw this lineup and you saw how it was being handled, I think it would be difficult for you to deduce on your own, oh wow, there's a different manager in here, we're doing things differently. Are you surprised that Emery has kind of just picked the biggest names and put them out there, as opposed to maybe opting for something with a little more clearly defined roles all over the pitch?
Yeah, we had this question on the Arscast Extra, so I'm not going to repeat it for the sake of...
because everyone will have heard it at this point.
No, well, just whoever might be listening to both. But just, a question that occurred to me was, I take the point about time, and we need to give Emery time and the process and all that kind of stuff. But if you were to ask me, for example, was I expecting a bit more? I probably was. In terms of a style, in terms of how defined the football that he wanted to play was. It's weird, I think, to be 7 games in and not really have an idea of what exactly it is he wants to do and how exactly it is he wants to do it. He talks a great game, and all the players talk very highly of what's going on, how much harder they're working, how much more instruction there is, how much more focus there is on the opposition. But I'm not sure we're necessarily seeing it on the pitch yet. And maybe it is just a consequence of it being a new manager, finding his feet in a new league, developing his relationship with the players in the squad, developing his communication skills as well.
Do you think his challenge managing big names is undermining a system he might want to install? When I look at those first 2 games, Andrew, I saw a much clearer system, and I said, I kind of see what he's trying to accomplish. When Lacazette and Aubameyang and Ramsey and Ozil and Xhaka are all out there, I don't see it as clearly. I mean, we know at PSG he had a really tough time because he had big personalities he had to manage, and I don't envy anybody who has to do that, especially with Neymar and that situation. But, I mean, do you think that maybe the tactical concepts he would want to implement are being undermined by his feeling that he has to get all of the big names on the pitch?
I don't think so. I'm not sure that Ozil could be compared to Neymar, for example. I'm not saying Ozil is the easiest guy in the world to manage. I think we've seen enough evidence that that's not the case. He needs a bit of special treatment from his manager, but I'm not sure he's the guy who's going to go crying to the owner the way Neymar would if he wasn't in the team or if he wasn't allowed to take the penalties and those kind of things. I think the Neymar situation at PSG was absurd and remains absurd, and I think any manager would find it a difficult thing to deal with because you're almost second place to a player, and that's not a healthy way to manage it. I just feel that he is trying to perhaps make up for defensive issues with the most amount of goal threat that he can get on the pitch, and that's two £50 million strikers, a midfielder who is well capable of scoring goals in Aaron Ramsey, and one of the Premier League's most creative players over the last 3 or 4 seasons in Mesut Ozil. But what he's got is a striker who's not that comfortable on the left. He's got a playmaker in Ozil who's being played in a position that he clearly doesn't feel that comfortable with either. That leaves him less involved. And Ramsey is a guy who I'm not sure why, if he was feeling like he had to indulge anyone, he would have to indulge Aaron Ramsey. Maybe it's an attempt to make him stay, to make him feel valued and sign a new contract. But maybe the other way to deal with that is to start lessening the reliance on someone like Aaron Ramsey. So I just can't quite figure it out in terms of what he's trying to do. And I'm quite prepared to give it more time, of course. It would be absolutely churlish not to do that in any way. But I have to say, I was just expecting something a little more defined from Unai Emery when he came to the club, and the way that he spoke about the way that he wants to play the game. I'm not necessarily seeing the things that he's speaking about on the pitch.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, I know Project 24 is rolling on and we're getting the wins, and no one's undermining that. And I don't think anybody's saying we're miserable about it. But for the people that say it's too early to expect to see something, I mean, you can look at Chelsea, who I don't think have been brilliant, by the way. I personally don't. But you can watch them and clearly see a system. Sarri's system is unmissable. So I don't think it's expecting too much to think that a coach can come in and pretty quickly have a clear system that you see on the pitch. It doesn't necessarily have to work, but you can see it. I'm just not sure I'm seeing it. I mean, that doesn't mean it's not there. I might just not be seeing it, which is entirely possible. In fact, likely. So, Tim, obviously it is another win, and it gets started with Lacazette scoring that beautiful goal. I think Lacazette is an interesting one for me right now because the underlying metrics aren't brilliant, and I know there are some people that would say small sample size, can't judge. He is banging them in, though, and that's the job of a striker. I mean, at the end of the day, we know that's the job of the striker. A lot of people say, oh, we need him at center forward because of his hold-up play. I think it's kind of funny because we spent a couple of years with Olivier Giroud at center forward, who was great at the hold-up play. And we did see Lacazette play as our striker last season, and we saw some of the deficiencies, I mean, more so on the road than at home. But I'm kind of curious. I mean, if we just set the goals aside, and it's hard to do because some of them have been brilliant. I thought the way he took his goal yesterday was sensational and decisive ultimately. But, I mean, do you feel that the praise Lacazette is getting for the way he's playing is definitely warranted on the balance of the way he's playing, or is it being overly influenced by the fact that he is getting the goals right now? And again, just so people don't come screaming at me, I know that's really important. But I mean, I just find it ironic because people are like, we were playing with Olivier Giroud and everybody was like, we need a penalty box striker with pace who isn't always looking to set up other people. And then we get him in Aubameyang, and now people are like, we really need Lacazette for his hold-up play and the way he plays with back to goal. And I'm like, am I taking crazy pills? We tried that already. So what do we help me here?
I don't think it is actually the goals that are kind of getting him the praise at the moment. I think it's because he's a bit more visible. I've made this comparison to Roberto Firmino a couple of times this season, that he's doing. So I don't think it's hold up play so much. I think I'd describe it more as link up kind of play. So he's doing that kind of harrying defenders from the front, and trying to create transitions, which I happen to think is very valuable. And actually, what we've got in Lacazette at the moment, and again, taking your point that it's because he's the only player that's playing in a position he wants to play in, is he's kind of a bit of a creative force and a goal scoring force at the same time, which is a little bit more than I think we're getting from some of the others. So he's helping his teammates by helping to, and again, link play, not so much hold up in the way that Giroud would, to compete in the air and bring the ball down with the chest and all of that. It's much more, I think it's a bit more along the floor, a bit smarter and a bit quicker than that. So I don't see that comparison so much. I mean, I still think that Lacazette and Aubameyang together is a perfect blend of qualities, because you've got kind of both types of striker, and they can both score, and they can both, to in their own way, not create in the sense that Mesut Ozil does, but create in the sense that they can make things happen for their teammates as well. So I think really Lacazette and Aubameyang, well, certainly where Lacazette's concerned, I think they kind of do come as a bit of a package. And Lacazette, one of the reasons I think he looks much more useful this season is because Aubameyang is there. And it's because I don't think that, maybe this is true of most strikers, but I think when you play Lacazette almost a bit like Welbeck, although I think Lacazette's better than Welbeck. If you play Lacazette and say, right, you're the main guy, you're leading the line, we'll give you the ball, go and score a goal, he looks a little bit, not lost, but doesn't look as comfortable with that. Whereas when there are players around him, i.e. Aubameyang, who can kind of help him with that and release that burden, not just of psychological expectation, but in terms of the movement and moving defenders around, when he's not the guy that's got three centre-halves up his backside because they've got to watch Aubameyang as well. I think you get a lot more out of him. I think if you took Aubameyang out and you put, say, Iwobi and Lacazette and, I don't know, Mkhitaryan or Ramsey or something, I think you'd see something slightly different, which is what we saw last year, where the burden was absolutely on him and he looked quite lost and quite isolated a lot of the time. I think Aubameyang's presence is freeing him. Whether his presence is freeing Aubameyang is another question.
Fair enough.
I think to a degree he does, because he does a lot of the work that Aubameyang doesn't really do, that kind of closing down stuff and the link play. Like Aubameyang doesn't really do that. He just likes to get on the shoulder. So I struggle to talk about one without the other, because I do kind of think that they come as a package.
Yeah.
But I don't think Lacazette is only getting credit because of the goals he's scoring. I think, because everyone's scoring, really. We're sharing the goals around. I do think there's a bit more to it.
Yeah, and that's fair. And I'm not trying to pick reasons not to like Lacazette, who I like and think is very good. I mean, I think it is a debate that can be made from a lot of different angles, and ultimately the goals settle the debate. So I acknowledge that. But, when you raise the issue of Firmino, you look at the weekend against Southampton, and Firmino made 6 passes to Salah, 3 passes to Sane, 9 to who's there? One of their fullbacks, Robertson. Is that right? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a hold-up player who's dropping in as a false 9 and then delivering to overlapping players who are running into the box to create threat. You look at Lacazette against Everton. Let's look at this. So, 1 pass to Aubameyang, 2 passes to Ramsey, 1 pass to Bellerin, 1 to Monreal. I mean, so, and again, I'm not using that to as a stick to beat Lacazette, but I'm suggesting maybe the way we're set up, we don't have the players running in behind or running past him. Aubameyang's not close enough to him. Clearly, 1 pass from Lacazette to Aubameyang is not ideal. If the idea is for them to create some kind of partnership, they need to be much closer together. We've seen that they have an understanding, but they're clearly not exchanging those passes now. The overlaps aren't happening. Yeah. We had a huge left side bias again, by the way. Xhaka played 22 passes to Nacho Monreal and I think 3 to Bellerin. So, I just wonder if we are going to play Lacazette, I am still of the opinion that Aubameyang needs to be much, much closer to him to get the benefit of that hold-up play. And obviously, this is a debate that will run and run. We can start to wind this down, as we pick the bones out of a 2-0 win. I think we have done a fantastic job seeing all the problems with it. So, Paul, I will give you your on-brand opportunity here. Tell me, what are the things about this win, apart from 3 points and 2 goals, that were encouraging? Some things that happened in this game that you say, I'd like to see more of that, or I was really impressed by how we handled that situation, or something like that.
Well, I think that's the thing. I think there's actually some good nuggets throughout this game when you go back and look at it. There just isn't enough of them, and we're not really taking. I think what I liked most in the first half, which wasn't a very good half for us, was we were at least feisty. We were winning a lot of battles. We were actually holding our own in midfield. We just weren't converting it into enough opportunities going forward, and there was a lot of sloppiness. So I did like the Torreira-Xhaka thing. I think they stayed close enough to each other, rather than where you see Xhaka and Guendouzi almost kind of heading off in different directions symmetrically across the pitch. So I think one of the things to build on, I do think, sometimes you pray for a player to come in because you think it's going to change everything, and they come in and it's a big flop. Well, it wasn't a raving success, but I think there were enough of the elements of what we expected from Torreira, his battle, his winning battles, how the two of them paired up, how they shared responsibilities. If they'd only conclude that it's Torreira who needs to pick up the ball from our centre backs, we might really start getting somewhere. So, I mean, that was my that's my hope going forward. We do more of that, and that Torreira looks to find Ozil. That's the one disadvantage with Xhaka on the ball. All those balls are typically going up the wing to Nacho or to Aubameyang, which actually paid off. I mean, you just see him spinning ball after ball up there, and it seems to work pretty well. But Ozil, I mean, I'm just looking at the highlights while we're chatting here. I mean, the number of times you can check his body language as a guy who didn't particularly enjoy that game yesterday. And I know he always has the body language things, but there are shades with Ozil of disinterest. And there's his excited shade, and there's his I'm not enjoying this shade. And he just doesn't seem to enjoy his football at the moment. Nobody's picking him out. And that's partly down to him, maybe more so in this game. I think the last game, he was actually pretty active running around the place looking for the ball, and still nobody was finding him. So that's my frustration, and my bit of hope is Torreira-Xhaka.
The best we could get after a 2-0 win from our team positive Gooner contributor was a 50-50. Here's what I didn't like, but also here's what I liked. Two quick questions to wrap up, Andrew. And the first one is just related to sort of going forward. We have we continue this Project 24 thing that Scott titled, but now Clive wants credit for.
You got t-shirts for this, by the way. Surely you should be selling merch
for Project 24. But the problem is that by the time we have it made, it'd be down to Project 18 and it'd be over. I don't want to jinx it. I don't want to be the reason it doesn't come to fruition. But if there was something you wanted to see from us as we continue that, I think our first real big challenge on the back of these 8 games is Liverpool. Am I right in saying that that's how we end this? Is Liverpool away? So Andrew, between now and that time, what are the developments that you'd like to see, or maybe a single development, something in our pattern of play or in our approach that would make you feel that this period of quote unquote easy games yielded the benefits that you wanted to see, other than the points?
Couple of things. First would be let's play in the first half. Let's actually do something decent in the first half. We've been super cautious. We've been on the back foot too many times in the first half of games, and it's to Unai Emery's credit that he's changed things and he's made a difference, and we've done well in the second half, and that's great. But I do think that to really start to impose the way we want to play on a game from the very start, I'd really like to see us have a good first half more than once. So that'd be the other thing. The second thing would be perhaps to control the game the way we did at 2-0. yesterday against Everton. Once we got 2-0 ahead, it was all set up for them to make a comeback, to pick up the pace, to have a go at us, to be aggressive, to maybe exploit some of the weaknesses that we definitely have, because they exploited them in the first half, but they didn't and they couldn't, and that was because we controlled the game very well. So I'd like to see a bit more of that. That should be something the team takes some confidence from. And just sort of going back to maybe something Paul said earlier on about how we view the results versus the performances. I'm not sure players go as in-depth on these things as we do. They'll probably just take more confidence from winning and getting a run of games and wins under their belts, a clean sheet under their belt as well. We can pick the bones out of it. They probably won't really think about it a great deal unless they have some sort of video analysis during the week where Unai Emery makes them re-watch it. And maybe that's a motivational factor as well. If you make them sit down and watch that first half, perhaps to avoid that kind of thing in the future, they might play better. So, I think the players will take a lot from this little run of games. It's been a pretty ideal run of games off the back of what was not an ideal start to the season against Chelsea and Manchester City. So, it does feel like results-wise we're moving in the right direction. We still have some worries about the process and the style and the system and all that kind of stuff. But I think they're more our worries than the team's worries, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I can't help but think, if Aubameyang puts away one or even both of those good chances he has against Chelsea, how different is so much of what we're doing now? If we wind up getting a result off of him, putting away one of which is basically a tap-in by his standards, the other one at the near post, I think he can equally expect himself to finish. And how different is our striker situation? How different are we looking at, the way we're playing? Does Emery stick with the system that he started the season with, or are we still playing this way? I think it would have been fascinating, and that parallel world would be one I'd like to dip my head into and take a look at, but we can't do that. I am a believer in the many worlds version of astrophysics or whatever it is, but we don't have to discuss that right now. In any event, a final question for you then. If you could pick the lineup for the Watford game, any changes that you would make, anything in particular that you'd like to see a lineup that you'd at least be curious to see tried out?
I suppose it depends on the fitness of Mkhitaryan, to be honest. Maybe you could bring in Iwobi for one of Ramsey or Ozil, but considering we're at home as well, I don't think he's going to make any changes unless it's forced on him by injury. I think we'll see the same team and the same lineup. Yeah,
Mkhitaryan is one of those players that I feel like is a real key to us getting more out of this team in general.
I find him quite frustrating in a way. I think he's really quite lightweight at times, but all of a sudden he pops up with some end product or creates something. I think he did it in the Newcastle game or maybe the Vorskla game, where he was really quite quiet and he made a terrible pass to Iwobi, and it would have been a good chance for Iwobi, and you're thinking he could do better than that. And then all of a sudden he picks the ball up and creates a goal for Danny Welbeck. Some people have sort of quipped that there's a touch of the Theo Walcott off him in a way, and I think that's not too far from the truth. But just in terms of providing a bit more balance to the front four, one of Iwobi or Mkhitaryan could easily come in for Ozil or Ramsey. But I just think that as we're at home, as we've won the last game, I think he's going to give that another go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I happen to really like what Mkhitaryan adds for us, and maybe it's just because I can't remember a time since Hector Bellerin's come into the squad that he's been so peripheral in the attack. And I think that Mkhitaryan's willingness to stay in that right half space and overlap with Bellerin and play those overlaps is something that adds a dimension to our game. And we've created a lot of chances this season when they've played together from those raids down the right and pullbacks towards the penalty spot. And certainly against Chelsea, we got a lot of joy out of that. And we haven't really seen it when Ozil has been playing in that position. So I think getting Bellerin more involved in the attack depends on us bringing Mkhitaryan in. But I definitely agree that he can be sloppy. Clive, I think, makes the good point that he sometimes makes the easy parts hard and the hard parts easy, which is frustrating because when he does the easy parts badly, you want to pull your hair out, but then he has some spectacular skill. So we'll see how that goes. I think we can leave it there. I think that is enough complaining about one win for one podcast. Certainly, hopefully, we'll have the chance to complain in midweek about a win in the whatever cup it is now, Carabao Cup, and then complain about a win over Watford at home at the weekend, and long may that continue. So in any event, here's what we'll do. We'll take a break. We'll hear about some beer. Scott will come back in. We're going to focus a lot on the Aubameyang Lacazette debate and sort of take a statistical look at that. Obviously, Scott has written by the numbers section for Arseblog, so if you haven't seen that, you should definitely go to Arseblog and read that before listening to this so that this can all be redundant and you've heard it before. In any event, Andrew, I really appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you soon.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.
Yeah, Tim's on Twitter at Stilberto, by the way. You can join him there. And check out his great match previews that he's doing on our Patreon, patreon.com/Arsenal Vision podcast. Or Arsenal Vision podcast. That's the one. Anyway, you can find it somewhere. Tim, thanks.
My pleasure, as always.
Paul's on Twitter at Pausing in My Pants. He's the cheery fellow who gave us what could arguably be described as the most upbeat moments of this episode. Thanks, Paul.
Woohoo!
When his
And
microphone's on.
can I echo that on Tim's video previews? I thought they were excellent. I know I'm biased, but actually I thought the last one was really, really good.
Personally, I thought you were fantastic on the halftime show, by the way. So
I was actually.
Yeah, and we are posting those on Patreon, but they're free for everyone. So if you don't catch them and you're curious to see how moany we were at halftime, we were very, very moany at halftime, as you can understand. My name's Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. I wrote something. Imagine that. It's moany, but it's moany about someone that you probably want to moan about anyway. That's Ivan Gazidis. I wrote a long 1,800-word examination of Ivan Gazidis' tenure at the club and whether we gained anything from it and what our reaction should be to him leaving. If you'd like to read something like that, it's on The Athletic, which is a subscription-based website, but they are awesome. They have some of the best writers in the world. Graham Hunter writes for them. Michael Goodman, the managing editor of StatsBomb, writes for them. George Qureshi, who founded The Howler, is the managing editor on the football side. And you can go to theathletic.com/Arsenal Vision, and they'll give you a free trial, and they'll give you 30% off. So if you'd like to try that, actually, James, Andrew, I believe you're familiar with James, also known as Gunnerblog. Occasionally chat with him. Yeah, he writes for them as well. It really is an extraordinary website, and it would be great if you would go give them a listen. So with that having been done, we're going to take a break, talk about some beer, and come back with Scott. But right now, it's time to tell you about our favorite monthly craft beer discovery club. In fact, it is the world's most popular craft beer discovery club, beer52.com. You're going to want to go to beer52.com/vision right now. The reason you're going to want to do that is you're going to get a free case of craft beer. A free case of craft beer. You're even going to get a copy of Ferment Magazine and a snack. So you're getting all of that for free. Just pay £2.95 shipping, and you'll be upgraded to free next day shipping, which is great. 8 incredible craft beers, a magazine, a snack, no-brainer. And I know all about no-brainers. Trust me, I have no brain. In any event, this is a chance for you to discover some of the best beers from around the world, and right now you get to take advantage of the Raise the Bar competition, Beer 52's search for the UK's best new small brewers in partnership with the London Craft Beer Festival. So you'll enjoy the likes of Unity's 7% Export Stout, Boxcar's Belgian IPA, and West by Three's Mothership with Passion Fruit. It's only available in the UK, which makes me very sad, but if you live in the UK, it should make you very happy, because by going to beer52.com/vision, not only do you make us happy podcasters, but you make yourself a happy owner of free craft beer. And so that is obvious. By the way, one thing we love about beer52.com, they have a 5-star rating on Trustpilot, so you know you are going with a very trustworthy company. Again, the most popular monthly craft beer delivery service, so take advantage of it. beer52.com/vision. Go there right now. Get your free case of craft beer. You're going to love it. All right, we're back, and now we are going to get to the really enlightening part of the podcast. I know it has been a laugh a minute so far, but it's going to be even more enjoyable and upbeat than ever now that Scott is here. You can find him on Twitter, _that_crab. Hello, Scott.
Hello.
So you haven't heard the start of the podcast yet, Scott, but I want to warn you, we took this 2-0 victory over Everton, and we really beat the shit out of it with misery and complaining and critiquing. So I guess that's the direction we're going to go, and I want to continue along that way with you. So, Aubameyang, Lacazette. This is going to be fun. I really want to dig into this. So, we go out and we buy Lacazette the summer of, last summer. Not this past summer, the one just before, and spend 50 million some odd pounds on him. And he comes in and he plays pretty well, and he does well at home and not so well on the road. And then in January, we double down and we go over 50 million pounds for Aubameyang, totally different type of striker, an even more prolific striker. And now here we are, seemingly not totally sure how to use them. There are Lacazette truthers out there that will tell you he is clearly the better striker and the one who should be playing center forward, and Aubameyang can either play...
Paul. I'm sorry, yeah, Clive.
Yeah, Clive. Yeah. And Aubameyang should be playing left wing or not at all, or at a minimum they should be playing two up front. You have Aubameyang truthers, myself, who say he is the superior striker and should be starting up front at a minimum, or two up front. Then you have other people that are a little more measured, we hate them, who say, let's see how it pans out. Right now, Aubameyang's banging him in here in displays. So I want to get your take, and I want to start with a little history, a little track record. Let's look at who these players were before we got them. So as far as Lacazette and Aubameyang, what kind of players did we get when we got these players?
Sure. So I did spend some time pulling up the historical stats for both of them. And Aubameyang, as I'm sure you're not going to be surprised, looks really good, especially you go back to his Dortmund days. And it's a ridiculously good, especially once he moved into the main striker role. So that would be, the 2015-16, 2016-17, and then, last year before he moved to Arsenal, he was one of probably the best strikers in the world, averaging, 3.8 shots per 90, an XG per 90 just under 0.9, and a goals per 90 just over 0.85. So basically, getting almost a goal a match that he was able to play a full minute for. The other thing that, to me, this is just astounding, is you look at where he was getting his shots off, and 64% of his shots come from the danger zone. So the danger zone's the center of the box plus the 6-yard box, with just 19% coming from one of the two wide areas, and then just 12% from outside of the box. So it's impressive to get good shot numbers. It's really impressive to be able to put up good shot numbers in dangerous areas. So that is something that Aubameyang had. So then, he switches to Arsenal last year, and he still, put up good numbers. So last year with Arsenal, he had an XG per 90 of 0.7. So not quite at the same level he was at Dortmund, but, it's only 1,000 minutes. So it's, kind of a smaller sample. And then you also, 2.6 shots per 90. So he lost about a shot per 90 with Arsenal, but was still able to put up 0.9 goals per 90. So he was able to actually still keep up his prolific scoring. And his shooting numbers stayed roughly the same where he was shooting from last year under Wenger. He's 68% in the box, 16% from the wide areas, and just 10% from outside of the box. So still really impressive. So even though he did play out on the left some,
still getting into those good positions, getting into the box, getting his shots, getting them from the locations we'd expect him to get. Maybe not at the ultra elite level he had been, but at a good level.
Excuse me, I just had to mute for a second to cough.
Okay. I was like, did I so mangle those stats that you were dumbstruck by them, or no? You're still
exactly no, but yeah. So it was impressive to be able to see him still be able to do that from the left. So that's where I was, a little bit. Getting some optimism from, if Emery was going to do the same thing. But, now we look at what he's done this year.
Before you go into that, would you like me to waffle for a minute so you can take a sip of water or clear your throat or something like that?
Sure. I wouldn't mind that at all.
Yeah, so I'll waffle. This is me waffling. And I'm adding great value. I'm contributing content here. This is professional content contribution that I am contributing, you might say. But back to you, Scott. Over to you.
I'm ready. All right. I'm feeling better.
All right, go for it.
All right. So, yeah, looking at last year, and it's actually surprisingly, well, maybe not surprisingly, for pretty close to what he was actually putting up when he was a winger at Dortmund. So, again, just not nearly as impressive. So, looking back to his Dortmund days when he was on the wing with Lewandowski up front, he was at 3.1 shots per 90. 0.3 XG per 90 and 0.4 XG per 90, which is, all being said, those are still really good numbers, but they're no longer in the elite range that he was before. And the big thing is also where he's shooting from, coming in from the left from Dortmund. He was 46% in the danger zone, 21% from the wide boxes, and 30% outside the box. And then, looking at this year, he's XG per 90. He's at 0.3, goals per 90, 0.4, 2.6 shots per 90. So he's still getting the same shots that he did last year under Wenger, but where they're coming from is completely different. So this year, he's only taken 36% of his shots from in the danger zone, 14 from wide areas, and 50% from outside of the box, which is really not the most optimal spot to be shooting from. I know he's put in a couple of really nice goals from outside the box, but in general, those are 3% kind of shots. and not ones that you really want to be taking at a regular basis, especially with someone who's as good at finishing as he is. I would really like to see him try to get better with his shot locations overall.
Yeah, well, I mean, that raises then the question of, if he's going to get better with those shot locations, does he need to be playing as a second up front or as the lone striker? And in order for that to happen, then maybe something has to happen with Lacazette. So let's take a look at him now. What was Lacazette? What is Lacazette?
So Lacazette is a really good striker, just not quite on the elite level. So going back to his days at Lyon, let's see, he was a 0.5 xG per 90, and that's usually about the cutoff that you really want to see from a really good striker. You know, a goal every other game kind of a thing. And
so, I mean, almost half of Aubameyang, but still. And just to be clear, these are per 90 stats, but non-penalty goal per 90, right? Because I know
that's
Lacazette
exactly right, yes.
got a lot of penalties at Lyon.
Exactly. Yeah, I think he had 10 in the year before we bought him. He had 3 in 2015-16 and 8 in 2014-15. So yeah, he did pad a lot of his stats with penalties, but he was still a good striker. So 0.5 xG per 90. I have him at 0.6 goals per 90. 2.9 shots per 90. So if compare that to what Aubameyang was. So Aubameyang was 3.8 shots per 90 as a striker, and Lacazette's 2.9. So that's one of the things that's really important as a striker, is being able to get shots off. I know that should come as a big surprise to everybody, but you want your strikers to get shots. And Aubameyang was better, but Lacazette is still pretty good. And then, looking at where he's shooting from, at Lyon, he was a 46% from the center of the bar, so the danger zone, 21% wide, and 23% outside the box. So that's still a pretty healthy mix of shots, more coming from better spots, but not quite the amazingness that was Aubameyang. And then switching to his time with Arsenal, so I have him, overall 0.5 xG per 90. So again, keeping that solid. 0.6 goals per 90. So it's the exact same production that you saw at Lyon. Overall, taking 2.8 shots. So that's roughly the exact same that he did before, but his shooting locations has actually gotten a lot better.
Okay.
So he's gotten 57% inside the danger zone, 21% from the wide areas, and only 14% from outside the box. So he really took to fingerball there, where he was more disciplined in where he's shooting from. So that was definitely a positive for him as well.
And you'd expect in a better team, and I put better team in rockstar quotes there, you'd expect him to get his shots from slightly better locations, right? I mean, at least in theory, I would think. But I guess what you're telling me, though, is in Lacazette, we have gotten almost exactly what we bought. And in Aubameyang, we bought someone who, at least statistically, was superior. Not incrementally superior, but significantly superior. And in the way we are using him, we are not getting that. Now, that doesn't mean that what we're getting from Aubameyang is bad. It certainly doesn't mean that we should replace Lacazette, but it certainly indicates, at least at some level, that we bought a striker who historically had put up better numbers than Lacazette. Lacazette is putting up the numbers he has historically put up, and we are using him at striker instead of the historically superior striker. Now, I'm going to go on from there, but I'm going to stop and ask you if I am basically getting that right.
I think you're getting that exactly right.
Okay. So where I'm going to go on from there then is, I do get a lot of pushback from people that say Aubameyang's not physical enough. He's a counter-attacking striker. He's a striker who fit the Dortmund style, but he can't handle it in the Premier League. We don't counter-attack as much in the Premier League, or he's lightweight for the Premier League. We need the hold-up play Lacazette gives us. Is there any indication, maybe XA or PPVA or any other metric that you look at that validates those claims or hints at those claims, or are those claims, while potentially true, just purely anecdotal?
And I think a lot of that, I think, is going to go into the way that you set up your system more than anything. I think if you are able to build your team around Aubameyang's skill set, some of those weaknesses can be negated. So I think that, if you have somebody else who can be the outlet, and I don't think that he can't be an outlet, because, you can do a thing that's, what Leicester always did with Jamie Vardy, and just play the ball into the channels if you're just looking to relieve pressure, and let Aubameyang put center backs under pressure chasing after some of those balls. So
especially with the number of good teams now that press and leave their back line with less cover.
Exactly. So I don't know if you definitely need that traditional, target man that'll, win you an aerial duel, hold it up, let everybody else come into play.
Well, can I ask you a question too, just super quick? Who has that? I mean, Manchester City, the all-conquering Manchester City, don't have that. They have Aguero and Gabriel Jesus and Sterling and Sané and
you could say maybe Lukaku kind of still fits that mold.
Well, and they're not exactly pulling up trees, to be fair. And maybe you'd say, well, Giroud over at Chelsea, but we had that experience. Well, I guess if you're going to play with a hold-up man striker, don't you need those players that are going to run off him and give him those options getting into the box?
Exactly. You need to build your team around that. So it is definitely going to be a stylistic way of playing. And I think the way that Emery wants to play, he wants to build out from the back. He doesn't necessarily want to lump long balls to a target man and then have other people, making that second man run off of that. I don't think that's necessarily the style of play he wants to play. So I don't think that that's needed. And then I think, you talked about Lacazette, and he has played as a number 10 or as a support striker where he does have those skills to drop deep. But I think you look at Arsenal's team, and that's not something that Arsenal are hurting for. We have the playmakers in the side. It's the goal scorers is where we're really hurting. We have Mesut Ozil, who is traditionally one of the best, creative players in the game. Alex Iwobi, who, that he doesn't necessarily have the end product of some of the the best guys, but he is a very good, creative player. You have Henrik Mkhitaryan, who is a very good creative player, but can play from the wings, but can also play in that 10 role. So I don't think that it's something that that's not going to get 100% of what you want out of Lacazette. I think that he is a very good striker who can do a job as a kind of a playmaker or as a target man or to be able to get other people involved, but that's not what you want from necessarily your striker, especially with the way that the Arsenal team is built.
And I mean, to be fair, he's banging them in right now, and when you're a striker and you're scoring goals, you keep your place, and I totally get that.
Exactly. No, I mean, this isn't to take anything away from him. He has had a very good start to the season. He's at 3.2 shots per 90 with a goal at 0.5 per 90. So, I mean, it's a very good return on what he's doing. He seems to be in good form. So I'm not complaining about him. I'm just saying we have one of the best strikers in the world. Let's use him. But this, I think it all goes back to the squad building over and over again, just the imbalance in the squad really messing up things so badly.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, it's not so much that Lacazette doesn't deserve to start at striker, but if you are going to spend the money you spend on Aubameyang and get historically an elite penalty box striker, that's where he is elite, that's why he costs what he costs, that's why you're paying him what you're paying him. If your plan is not to use him that way, then use those funds to buy an elite wide player and play that player wide, right? Or someone that supports Lacazette at center forward. But buying Aubameyang for that price with those stats historically and using him in a way that doesn't get what you paid for seems silly. I mean, it's kind of like, paying for a sports car and then taking it off-roading. It's still a very nice car, but it's not doing what you paid for it. Anyway, there's one player we can definitely complain about that's not Lacazette or Aubameyang, and that's Mesut Ozil, at least statistically, caveat. Mesut Ozil's statistics are not where you'd like to see them, and against Everton, he once again put up a performance, at least from a creative standpoint, that is near the bottom of what we expect to see from him. This is consecutively games now where his offensive value added and passing value added have been low. His passing volume has been low. Maybe you can give us some... not just the statistics from this game, but maybe you can put into context for us why this is such a problem.
Sure. So I went through this and I pulled up my historical data. So I have league data going back to the 2014-15 season. So that's 97 matches for Mesut Ozil, and the game that he actually had against Everton. So he ended up getting. Let's see, the offensive value added of 0.02, which was on the day one of our worst players. Mustafi was worse. Socrates rated lower, Czech rated lower. So of the players that played a good game, those were the only, or played a full match, those were the only players that were worse than him in this rating.
Socrates came off, so he doesn't even really count.
Exactly. Yeah, I shouldn't have said him. But yeah, it's another injury for a defender, which is exactly what Arsenal needed this time. looking at that, this is a stat that's basically built for him to be awesome at. I didn't do it on purpose. I tried to measure all of the good things or bad things a player does. And usually Mesut Ozil is one of the best at this statistic. And so looking at it, going back, this ranks as his 94th worst performance out of 98 total in the
94th
sample.
out of 98.
That's exactly right.
In a 2-0 home win. That's not encouraging.
Yeah, so I mean, he's had a couple worse matches. Some of these, he didn't play a full 90 in, but this was definitely among the worst. He's had matches where he puts up almost 2 in these, or typically his is going to be you're closer to 0.7, 0.8. In this, so he was way off the pace of what you'd normally expect from him.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because I realize anytime you're critical of Mesut Ozil, there are people that are going to rush to his defense, and I think Mesut Ozil is one of the most talented playmakers in the game, but you can't argue with the conclusion that he's struggling right now, and you can argue with why. Maybe it's because of where he's being played. Maybe it's because of things that are going on with him off the pitch. But he's struggling, and it causes Arsenal to struggle because he is really the oil that gets the gears turning in that attack. He's not feeding Lacazette. He's not feeding Aubameyang, and that's a problem. So one of the reasons is he's not being played at the 10, and that's because Ramsey is. So let's talk about Aaron Ramsey. Is Aaron Ramsey doing anything that gives him the right to hold on to that position over Mesut Ozil?
Yeah, I don't think that Ramsey has been particularly impressive too. So this really goes back to, again, the imbalance in the squad and how trying to put things together kind of is a domino effect where other people are now being forced out of position as well. So, we put Aubameyang left, and that takes out a wide forward spot that could go to another player. Then that doesn't necessarily pick that you want Mesut Ozil in the 10 because, I guess Emery's looking for someone who can lead the press, which Ramsey does a pretty good job for. But then, you push Ramsey, or then you push Ozil out to the right, and that takes another spot where you can't have, a Wilby, or you can't have Mkhitaryan in the team. And it's really hard to put things together. So I really looked at the first half because that's where Ozil was staying kind of to the right, or it was tough. Did he not really know exactly where to play with Ramsey? And it was just amazing how much he just kind of disappeared from the match. He only had 21 first half touches, which is very surprising. But again, Ramsey was one of the people that actually had less. So neither of them were really able to get into the game. And normally those two, they may not be the biggest ones. So, usually it'll be Xhaka and maybe some of the center backs that have more touches than them. But they're normally typically, the top 3 or 4 players, both of them getting heavily involved. And neither of them were able to in the first half. The other thing that I was super surprised with was how few forward passes Ozil was able to make, because that's usually one of his fortes, is actually being able to do those really good passes, the decisive cutting passes, to be able to create clear-cut chances. And he had 5 first half forward passes, and that's all passes, not just completed ones. Actually, that is just his completed passes, which is bad. I think he was 5 of 6 on his forward passing, and then he actually didn't complete any passes into the box. Just attempted just the one, so it was very, very bad. And didn't create any chances and didn't even have any XG chain in that first half. So nothing was going through him. Arsenal didn't play well in that first half. And I think a lot of it was just that neither of their, really key players in Xhaka, Ramsey, and Ozil could really get going in the match.
And as a result, the whole performance looks the way it does, which is a little disjointed. You don't have Ozil pulling the strings and creating chances. You don't have Ramsey running on to second balls and getting chances. You don't have Aubameyang showing up in the box for shots from high-quality areas. The only player looking pretty good is Lacazette. And Lacazette, to be fair, is playing in the position where he wants to be playing. But even Lacazette, I thought, struggled a little. And, in a team that's not functioning right, eventually your center forward's going to struggle a little bit too. Were there any other performances or players that stood out for you? Xhaka made a lot of passes. He also made quite a few mistakes early on under pressure. I think this is going to be another hot debate for this season and beyond, and has been even previously, is this is a player who is absolutely crucial to the way we want to build play, but also absolutely unable to be safe with the ball under under pressure, and we want to play out from the back. So what are we getting more benefit or more risk from having Shaq in that role?
Yeah, it's a tough one because again, it was definitely so he led Arsenal in the overall positive passing value added, but also led in the overall negative passing value added. So he does a lot of good and a lot of bad. Overall, he put up a decent game. I had him at a 0.13 for the overall offensive value added. So that would be behind Bellerin, Aubameyang, Monreal, Lacazette. But just ahead of Torreira. He had more passes attempted than Torreira, so that was probably a little bit to deal with that. I think it's going to be interesting to actually get an idea of, is it going to be Xhaka or Torreira that's going to go the deepest, because I think that Torreira is a little bit more press resistant, and I think that's something especially early in that match, and that especially that first probably 15-20 minutes, Everton were pretty relentless in targeting him. And really focusing on him when he was on the blind side, back to where Arsenal were attacking. They had a player coming in from the backside and putting him instantly under pressure where he couldn't turn and face his options to be able to make a forward pass. And you could see that he was very, very uncomfortable dealing with that. He made almost a costly mistake. He had a couple of them where he just kind of turned and fired it up the field just aimlessly, because I think at one point early in that first half he was just 1 of 5 on his long passes where almost nothing was coming off for him. So it's an interesting conundrum that Arsenal are under. When Everton did kind of drop back because they couldn't sustain that level of pressure for the entire match, he looked a lot better, and I think that is the big thing with Xhaka. When given time and space, he is an amazing passer. When not given time and space, he does not make the best decisions. He does not have it in his tool set to be able to wiggle out of pressure, to be able to break that first line of press with his feet. So I think that is something that we're going to need Torreira to be able to do when teams press us, to be able to be that outlet and to be able to break that press, be able to give Xhaka more time to be able to pick out the pass that he needs.
Really well said. Before we start to let you go, were there any other statistics from this match you want to pick out, or maybe just your opinions actually of how the system's coming together and whether you can really see the forest through the trees yet?
I'm still a little bit worried. So this is 4 wins in a row in the league, which is obviously really good. But there still hasn't really been an actual convincing performance. There hasn't even really been much of a convincing half of play. So there's still worries. I'm happy to get results, but I would have liked to have seen more impressive results to be able to show that there's a process to trust. Because right now it's looking like we're just playing average and hoping for one of our really good attackers to have a moment of brilliance to be able to bail us out. And luckily that's happened a few times. So I'm not seeing what Emery is building towards, which is a bit of a worry. So there's still 4 more games left in Project 24. So hopefully by the end of that, we'll have a better idea of what is actually trying to be built towards.
Nothing would be more Arsenal than for us to win 8 games on the bounce in the league, come away with 24 from 24 points, and feel like the team is a shambles that's playing terrible football. I mean, you can't win for losing sometimes, and if you're the Arsenal coach. And I do think, Scott, that we are the same people who said we'll have to be super, super patient at the beginning of the season. The irony for me was I was prepared to be super patient with poor results as long as it felt like the process made sense and we could kind of look at it and logically understand where it was taking us. I think the reason for the concern is the process, right? I mean, you look at the process and you say, we still seem pretty open defensively. We still seem to be doing a lot of horizontal passing. We have 3 superstars in Aubameyang, Ramsey, and Ozil who are underperforming their historical averages. I mean, it is fair, results aside, to worry when the process is muddy, and I think that's where we're at. I mean, is that a fair summation for you?
Yeah, I think so. And it's tough because you want to be the new coach who's supposed to come in and be ruthless, and it almost doesn't seem like he is, because I think it's almost at this point where you almost need to pick an 11 and say this is what it's going to be. We're going to build towards that, but it's been a bit wishy-washy. I think that Emery's it still seems like he has a lot of question marks too. There's been numerous halftime subs. or big tactical changes, after, 60 minutes where, things are not going right and he really needs to go back to the drawing board. So it's one of those things, if he had kind of committed to something and say, this is going to be my team, we're going to go with it, and, we're going to build on it, and we're just going to try to see something through, I might feel a little bit better. I mean, again, results have been great. They're getting what they need to do, but it doesn't seem like when, the matches start to get a little bit tougher that we're going to be having a platform to build on to be able to take on those better teams.
And it's interesting because right before we go to or host Liverpool at the Emirates on the 3rd of November, we go to Crystal Palace on the 28th of October. And that's not exactly an easy game. And we might get, that's the culmination of Project 24. So, I think, if we can beat Watford at home and Fulham away and Leicester at home, these are possibilities. Palace might be the one hiccup right before we go to Liverpool. So we'll have to see how that pans out. But, hopefully the process starts to match the results. At a minimum, if you had to pick one or the other, I think at this point you'll take the results. So let's just be happy with that.
Yeah. I would rather, us be, eking out ugly wins over, dominating the XG table, but, not getting points.
Yeah, absolutely. Because ultimately you can improve your performances. You can't improve your points. My name's Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. Scott is on Twitter at _that_crab. Thanks, Scott.
Yes, thank you.
Leave us a 5-star review. Write nasty things about us in the comments. Thanks for putting up with us this episode. I know we did a lot of sort of complaining. I don't know that we complained, but digging into issues in a win. But I think it's good to get our hands around what's happening other than just saying, yay, we won. And then, that's the end of the podcast. Although some of you would say, I would listen to that. Why don't you do more of that? But, there's a different brand for everybody. Go to our Patreon, patreon.com/Arsenal Vision Podcast. I don't think that's it. Go to our Patreon. You'll find it. It's on our website, arsenalvisionpodcast.com, and support us. Scott has some great tools on there. Data that lets you make your own radars, look at all the historical data, look at performances individually. It's fantastic stuff. You don't want to miss it. Tim is doing video previews. We have an In the Spotlight coming up on Aaron Ramsey next week. That's a dedicated episode just to Aaron Ramsey. That should be really interesting and potentially polarizing, and some other really exciting new projects coming up there. As always, we appreciate you, though, whether you listen to that or you just listen to the regular podcast. We are just super happy to have you here, and we love you, and thank you. So we are going to say goodbye for today, but the good news is we got a midweek game. I don't know if there's any way to watch it. I'll have to find that out. It is the Football League Cup, the Carabao Cup, Arsenal hosting Brentford. So we will come back and talk to you more after Arsenal 10, Brentford 0.